All right. Hi, everybody. It's our CFB Talk 95. We're back. We're talking TCU football. My name is Bob Akayeri. I'm going to be joined by my regular co hosts, JD Moore and Sirius. And we have a guest who's already in the audience. So I'm going to go ahead and get him up here right now. But we're going to be joined by Stephen Johnson, football writer for the Star Telegram in Fort Worth. Just wanted to thank all of you for joining us as we get this all rocking and rolling. JD, have you made it up?
Yes, absolutely have made it up here. Very excited to talk about some TCU football. Of course, I've got a little bias there because I am an alumni of TCU, but fascinating story this year with Sonny Dykes' first year at TCU has now become the last remaining undefeated team in the Big 12. And right now, it looks like that title is going to run through Fort Worth for the Big 12 championship. Stephen, obviously, this is his first year as well in Fort Worth. Very excited to see his perspective on a new program, a new mantra underneath Sonny Dykes, where the guys seem like they're enjoying playing football. It's a fantastic environment right now in Fort Worth. Amon G. Carter Stadium is rocking. The student section is loud. It's going to be a very fun chat on what is so far a very fun team with TCU. And Steven, I think you are on and up here.
Yep, I'm here, guys. How's it going?
Very good. Very, very good.
I,
Well, Stephen, let's first go ahead and kick this one off with a huge comeback victory that TCU had this past weekend against Oklahoma State. It has been a while since we've seen TCU come back in a two-score game, especially that late in the game. What was going on with that fourth quarter when they were actually able to get some drives together and win it in overtime?
well, I think you got to give your hats off to the defense first and foremost. I think they held Oklahoma State to about 32 yards of offense. So they really just kept giving the offense time, I think, to really find the rhythm and finally start finding opportunities to attack that Oklahoma State defense. You know, with the way the game started, especially considering when they lost by about 46 points last year, you could understand if the game would have just got away from TCU. Like, hey, we're better than last year, but we're not quite there. But they just kept fighting. I think it's a testament to kind of the mentality Sonny Dice and the rest of the staff are kind of just imprinted on the entire program. Just move on to the next play, keep doing your job. And if you keep executing, good things are eventually going to happen. So I think the defense really set the tone and opened the door for Max Duggan, Quentin Johnson, and the rest of those guys to kind of come in and have that big rally.
You kind of mentioned that mentality that Sonny Dykes has brought in. And, you know, you've had 20 plus years with Gary Patterson. You had a couple of years that were struggling, at least since that 2017 team. But now you have this team that seems incredibly resilient when they have the opportunities to be resilient. What's kind of been that change in mentality? Like, what is Sonny Dykes doing differently in Fort Worth than we've maybe seen from some previous TCU teams?
Well, I think one of the first conversations I had with Sonny was, and he said he wanted TCU to now be a player first program. So I think there's been a bigger emphasis on player well being. Not saying they were being mistreated or anything like that, but I think Sonny really understands the modern athlete a little bit more than maybe Gary did at the end of his tenure. So I think the players feel empowered. I think they're having a lot more fun. Obviously, and there's things like what they're doing with nutrition. Like these guys, they're taking all those small things very seriously. You're talking to different players around the team. They said they immediately bought into what Sonny and those guys were preaching. That even if they didn't understand it first, they gave them an opportunity, and now they're seeing it play out. So obviously, I don't think that's the situation last year or in previous years when they got down by 17 points, 14 points, where they would have been able to battle back, especially against a top 10 team.
Stephen, I found that kind of an interesting comment about how he seems to be, more player first. And I get what you're saying there. So is it that Sonny Dykes kind of approaches it also from, I mean, it's weird to say it, like, I almost said it like, does he understand, the youths of today? But you know what I mean? Is it that he just gets kind of the NIL and kind of all the things that appeal to his players to kind of bring it to their level in a way where they feel more connected, more like because the cliche is anytime you go and interview at a media day, they all say we're a family. But I mean, but is this a situation where the players are generally getting that bigger connection with the team as a whole?
It feels like that, and it feels like the players are able to kind of connect more with the entire, like, Fort Worth, the entire community. The access. I wasn't here during the Patterson era, but all the stories I've been told was kind of like this is just a new day and age in terms of what you're seeing from the program, how it markets itself. They're always constantly saying, "Hey, we're DFW's Big 12 team. You know, we're the team in the biggest market in this conference. So we want to keep acting like it, man." And I think with the players, I think he does understand NIL. He's okay with going to the portal. He understands like sometimes players need to do what's best for them. And I consider this the player empowerment era, not only in the pros and the NBA, but also in college now. Like players have options, they have a little more say than they did in the past. And I think Sonny is okay with that and doesn't need to control every little facet of these players' lives and things like that. So I think there's just a lot more. There's a lot more, maybe a type of freedom, a little energy around the program. That's just the kind of sense I've gotten, kind of talking to people and just being around practices and things like that.
Earlier this season, we had Jeremiah Donati on for a show, and one of the things that he
JD.
mentioned fantastic athletic director stepping up after Cristobal Conte went down to Texas. And one of the things that he mentioned when he came and did an interview with us, again in that NIL space, is the ability to market athletes in a DFW market, one of the largest media markets in the country. And Sonny Dykes is definitely taking that over by saying it's DFW's Big 12 team. What has that marketing been like for these athletes? Are we seeing any kind of specific NIL deals or anything that has really stood out for any of these players?
Well, I can say for me personally, I think, and just kind of listening to readers and different fans alike, they feel like, at least from the media standpoint, they're getting to know these players a lot more. Like certain stories that we've been able to do, like on Max Duggan, on a Mark Perry, a Colorado transfer at safety, Quentin Johnson as well too. Some of those deeper one-on-ones, those in-depth profiles. I don't know if they were doing a lot of those before that, but I think that's just one example of Sonny wants the people around the country, around this market, to really know who his players are, and like beyond their stats, beyond the fact they play for TCU, they all have their unique stories and unique personalities. So I know that's definitely one way they've, I guess, maybe stepped it up in terms from a marketing standpoint. What they've been doing with social media with guys like Brian Carrington and things like that is paying off on the recruiting trail. I think right now they're still kind of in that top 25 mix and could have one of the best classes ever. So I think there's been a bit of a more progressive message, I think, and now I think TCU is kind of getting up to standards and really taking advantage of being the fact that they're right in the heart of one of the places that loves football the most, and I think TCU has some of the most passionate fan bases I've been around, and I know they got a couple guys with some big money too, so I think it's helping them in all type of different areas.
So obviously, this was something where this is clearly Max's team. And I mean, it had been Chandler Morris had the starting job, but could you talk about how Max has stepped up to be a leader and be someone who seems to have a very high upside right now?
Well, I think Max is just an overall great story, just a great dude to be around. Obviously, he was a guy that had about 30 starts under his belt when he didn't win the job, or he had like the inclination that it wasn't going to be his job. It would have been completely understandable if he would have entered the portal, went to another Power Five program, things like that. But he wanted to stay. He told me when he committed to TCU out of high school, he viewed it as a 4-year commitment. So even when he didn't win the job, he wanted to remain committed to the program and just really do his job and help TCU in the best way he could. In his viewpoint, his 3 years weren't, from a winning standpoint, wasn't what he wanted. So I think he said he couldn't really leave without helping them get out on top. And then obviously it was unfortunate what happened to Chandler in the first game of the season. But I think it just kind of showed staying ready, being ready for the moment. And after that, man, he just meshes so well with this offense. And honestly, Sonny Dice and Garrett Riley deserve a lot of credit, as does he, for just the improvement he's been showing, the numbers he's been putting up. And I think overall, like, everybody on the team really rallies around him and his leadership and his play style.
One of the things that I think is definitely a huge story in Fort Worth right now is Max Duggan. At least when it comes to career yards, he's going up there with like guys like Trayvon Boykin, Andy Dalton in terms of career passing yards. And this development that we've seen is something that a lot of TCU fans have been waiting for a while now. At this point, he's seemed to
Mhm.
really blossom underneath Garrett Riley. How is that coordination as his quarterbacks coach and offensive coordinator really allowed Max Duggan to open up with this offense?
Well, I think everybody you kind of talk to, his dad, the coaches, everybody, like, he's just playing with more confidence. And I think week to week, and what in terms of what TCU is trying to do schematically on offense, I think it remains relatively the same. Some things I heard in the past were maybe you were trying to do too much, switching things up from week to week. But TCU they emphasize what they really do well, and they try to perfect that. So I think each game, you kind of see they do a great job of getting him in the rhythm. Like I wouldn't be surprised, they play against Kansas State. They start off with 2 or 3 of those bubble screens, maybe a short route underneath, and by the time you look up after the first drive or so, he's completed 4 or 5 easy passes, and now he's in the rhythm, and then he starts taking those shots down the field. So I think the offense has done a great job of just kind of simplifying things and just making things easy for him. And I think he's done a great job of just focusing on doing his job. You haven't really seen him try to force the issue. His decision making has been excellent. I think he only has 1 turnover, and that was an interception on a Hail Mary at the end of the half. So, I mean, he's just been doing great, and you can just really tell how comfortable he is in this offense.
Stephen, Quentin Johnson, he's really sort of, I mean, he had obviously a slow start, but he's really just kind of risen to be a potential first round pick as, top receiver. And he's a bit like, Josh Doctson and, how he's a top target for Max. Is that something you've seen there? I mean, how has it been for you to observe as someone who sees it day to day, his rise to being such a prominent part of that offense?
Well, I think he's for sure should go in the first round. I would take him. But I think he has everything you really want in a receiver these days. He's a legit 6'3", 6'4", has long arms. He's a guy, he can be explosive after the catch. I think on that game time drive against Oklahoma State, he took a simple curl route and took it 30 or 40 yards to kind of set up that game time touchdown. So that kind of just shows what explosiveness he has. And he just makes some of these crazy acrobatic catches, man. He can go up and get the football, so he kind of has everything you want. And the thing that really impressed me the most was just how he handled that slow start. With all this chatter about, hey, you're gonna go in the first round, you could be an All-American, this and that. When you get off to that slow start where you're barely getting 30 yards a game, especially against teams like Colorado and Tarleton, who those are the games you're expecting to put up numbers. It would have been easy for him to get frustrated, be a bit of a diva, like, hey, I want to be a bigger part of the offense. But I think he understood that, hey, I'm facing all these double teams, but it's opening the door for guys like Darius Davis, Tay Barber. And when those guys are being so productive, eventually you have to respect them. And now defenses are. And he's just feasting on the opportunity. So his leadership is almost probably just as impressive what he's able to do on the field.
Steven, it kind of seems like this TCU program this year, they're really getting, the advantage of that senior leadership, veteran leadership coming from these skill players. Sonny Dykes has installed his program now. He's connecting with the players. They're off to a fantastic start to the season. Obviously, with Oklahoma and Texas exiting probably the next couple of years, what kind of there's going to be a little bit of a power vacuum. Does this really make a big difference in setting Sonny Dykes up for success?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's kind of what the marketing of being DFW's Big 12 team kind of comes to effect. When those two programs leave, like you said, there's going to be a power vacuum. And I think people around TCU, especially with the start now, and I think they felt this way even before they kind of got out to this amazing start. There was a kind of this thought of like, why not us? We're in probably the best recruiting hotbed in the country. We already have a history of success in the Big 12 and in other conferences. And now we think we have the right coach who already has experience kind of building the program up in this area. So I think TCU feels confident that they can be one of those teams that kind of becomes, I guess you could say, one of the premier brands in the Big 12. And obviously this start helps, especially when you beat an Oklahoma the way you did. That Texas game down the road, I know it's one game at a time. That game is going to be crazy as well, too. So I think TCU already felt it was in a good position to be one of those teams that could kind of rise to the top. But now I think this started showing them that it could be a little bit quicker than maybe they even anticipated.
Steven, I know that you've also recently reported with Brett Yomark announcing, Texas and Oklahoma are now, quote unquote, committed through 2025. We'll see how realistic that still remains. But as they move to a 14-team league, like Brett Yomark has said that there's going to be scheduling where everybody gets to play each other at least once over the next 2 years. What does that look like for TCU's schedule going forward? I imagine they probably, protect like some Texas rivalries, but is this something where we're going to see TCU, maybe drop a series or two?
I think so. I think for the most part, they'll keep all their Texas schools. You'll be playing like a Texas Tech, Texas, and all those guys like every year, at least while Texas is here. I think a lot of fans pointed out to me that BYU might be a team that you might add to the schedule and kind of be one of those opponents you play every year. I think, logically, logistically, it would make sense to maybe drop a West Virginia once a year, or maybe not have TCU go all the way out to play Central Florida. So I think they'll keep all the Texas schools. Of course, you're adding in Houston. And I think kind of bringing BYU back and maybe establishing a new type of rivalry would also be kind of be on the schedule for TCU as well too, if I just had to guess.
Well, I mean, certainly as well with BYU. I mean, I know they had several years with the Mountain West Conference,
Mhm.
and with them being rivals as well. I'm sure, especially for that rivalry, if they get to have a renewal. I don't think they've played them since I believe 2011 when they were in that
Mhm.
Cowboys Classic. But I'm sure if they end up playing BYU, that's going to be a rivalry renewed for TCU and BYU.
Yeah, absolutely. That was I think I kind of remember those games between them. It was a long time ago. I still remember those Andy Dalton teams, but I think the fact that you can kind of bring BYU in, who has its own kind of unique place in the college football landscape, and kind of already have a team that you can say this is a natural rival for them. I think that's big for the conference. I think the fact that TCU is excelling right now kind of gives the Big 12 maybe a potential kind of flagship program in the Dallas market is also good for the conference. So I think the Big 12 feels very strongly about its outlook, and I know TCU feels like it's going to have a big say in the positive outcome for the Big 12 in the years to come.
Stephen, what does it mean for TCU playing its fourth ranked opponent this weekend against K State? This is an interesting run here. Obviously they smashed Oklahoma. They had that. I mean, they've had two extremely memorable games already at Kansas and with Oklahoma State. Now it's K State, all ranked, four in a row. How do you think that's going to affect the program? I mean, and if they can make it through this next game?
Well, they're in the grind for sure. And honestly, if we're being honest, this is their fifth straight week or fifth straight game where they're just kind of in the, I guess you could say, in an emotional game. Starting with SMU in their rivalry week. Oh, Sonny's going back to his old team, Dallas versus Fort Worth. So they've kind of been in this unique space where every game has had some pretty significant stakes, whether it be around the program or in the conference. But I think what gives TCU fans confidence is really just the mentality of the team as happy as they were to beat Oklahoma State, you could almost hear it immediately in the press conference, like, hey, it doesn't matter. We got to move on. We got to put this to the side, starting on Sunday and turn our attention to Kansas State because they're not going to care that we beat Oklahoma State. The Big 12 is just kind of, it's one of those years in the conference where there's no guaranteed win. So I think TCU understands that. And they know that, hey, you've done great. First time in program history, you beat three ranked teams in a row. But now, as Sonny said, your reward is you got to play a fourth one, and they're coming off a bye week, and you haven't beat them in 3 straight years. So now they understand, like, they haven't arrived yet. They understand there's still a lot more to go. And I think, as Sonny said the other day, the season will be judged on how they finish. So I think they're excited about it, but I think TCU really has a great understanding of we got to finish. We got to finish, and that starts with Kansas State. So, Oklahoma State, it was a magical win, but it won't mean anything if we don't come out and handle business against Kansas State.
I think at the beginning of this year, everybody kind of looked at TCU from inside the program and said, 8-4 would be a over the moon success if we got to that level for this year. But now you're 6-0. You're looking at a potential possibility of playing for a Big 12 title, possibly an outside shot at the playoffs. What ends up being the new adjusted goal right now for TCU that you've heard inside of the program?
Well, I think everyone right now is thinking about, hey, we think we might have the pieces to kind of go and end up in that Big 12 title game. The schedule, it's tough, but I really feel like TCU, especially if they can win this weekend, you'll probably be favored in every game. The Texas line might be interesting, but I think right now, if you beat Kansas State, I think they'll probably be favored in the rest of their games, with the exception of maybe one potentially, at Texas. So I think TCU has a realistic viewpoint of if we keep doing what we're doing, focusing 1 week on a time. We have one of the best offenses in the country. I think that's been pretty established. I know Kansas State is going to be their biggest test defensively, but it's an offense that's top 3 in yards per play, total offense, scoring. They lead the country in explosive play percentage. So they feel like they have one of the best offenses in the country. I think they've seen enough improvement from the defense, especially just making timely plays, that TCU feels like it has all the pieces to compete for a conference championship. And maybe that might have felt like wishful thinking in the offseason. But now with the way the players have shown it and what Sonny Dice is doing, I think TCU has and should expect to kind of be in that in the thick of the Big 12 race, if not to be the favorite.
One of the changes that TCU's had this season was bringing in Joe Gillespie from Tulsa and switching from a 4-2-5 to a 3-3. What has that implementation been like? Because we've seen this, attempted at other universities before, where it is usually not a smooth transition, just because you're trying to put, square pegs and round holes a lot of times. How has that
Mm.
worked out so far for TCU?
Well, I think everybody you talk to on defense says the defense is a little bit simpler and they're able to play faster. You know what I mean? They're not giving up as many big plays. Um, and I think they have some guys on each level of the defense. So there's been some improvement. I really like the guys in their secondary, and like Gillespie puts a lot on the plate of his safeties, in particular, guys like Miller Bradford, Mark Perry, Abe Kamara, and Bud Clark, who just came back last week and had that kind of terrific interception. So I think TCU, there's still rooms for improvement, but I think overall you're seeing the defense that's able to play a little bit faster and is able to force offenses into more mistakes. So it'll be interesting to see how they do against Kansas State. An offense is going to be committed to the run maybe more than their past couple of opponents. But overall, I like what I've seen from the defense. Obviously, like I said, there are room for improvement, but I feel like right now the defense can make enough plays to complement the offense. And that's ultimately the goal for TCU. They want to play complementary football. And I think the defense right now has done enough to kind of live up to that billing.
Bud Clark had a big coming out party against Oklahoma State. What does he contribute as defensive back to the Frogs?
Well, and Bud was another guy. He was kind of in a unique situation, almost like Chandler. He was a guy balling out in the preseason. One of the last practices we saw, I think, he had like an interception that looked like it would have been a pick six. Couple days later, we find out he's in the boot. He misses the first couple games. A's playing great and filling in for him. But then he brought in, and I think he immediately showed what he kind of was showing in the preseason. He's physical. He's flies to the football, and he plays with joy, man. He plays with joy when we talk to him when he's on the field. The way he celebrates, you can tell he's a guy. He's out there that just loves playing football. So I think he just gives TCU another playmaker, especially in the back end. And I think he's going to be a big boost for the defense, especially if he's kind of sliding back into that starter role or just getting more snaps in general.
I know I've seen a couple of former players here in this chat. What's up, Josh Caraway, the big man from some of those fantastic teams in the mid 2010s. What has been Sonny Dykes' relationship so far in connecting to some of these previous lettermen? Because again, when you go and you change in a gigantic shift of, Gary Patterson built this program, he's got the statue on campus, modern TCU football is considered to be built by Gary Patterson. Now you got the new guy coming in. What kind of bridging has he done with the old regime to kind of continue on the momentum that has been built on that foundation?
Well, we've talked to a couple players, former players at practice. And like I said, that's just another example. Practice is always open. There's no telling who you see there. People in the administration, old players, obviously us. When we talk to them, they said, Sonny, like you said kind of earlier, every program says they're a family and they're going to treat you right and things like that. But I think some of those older players that I had a chance to talk to, they feel like TCU really means that now, or Sonny really means that. They've been welcomed back, like I said, to come watch practice, come to those games. So I would say he's done a pretty good job of establishing that connection, even to the past, even though he's a new guy, just got here. But it is a family. So I think those players, some of those older guys, like I said, I had a chance to talk to, feel like he's opened the door for maybe them to come back to a warmer welcome than maybe in the past. So I think he's done pretty good in that regard as well.
Additionally, as well, I know that TCU had finished their East Suites. Jeremiah Donati had talked plenty about that with the facilities arms race. You've already got a built-out Amon G. Carter Stadium. You've got the new basketball arena. You've got the indoor practice facility. You've got these new East Suites. What are new plans, if any, for some upcoming facilities upgrades or work around the TCU football program?
Well, I know of some. I don't know if I can say just say too much yet, but I can say that TCU. One of the first things they told me when I was on the visit here, it was that the nickname for it was a Texas Construction University, and I think they're going to keep living up to that nickname. I know they have a few things in plan, kind of coming up for the football team. I can't say too much about it, but I imagine you'll be figuring out pretty soon. And from what I've been told, let's just say it's going to be a massive addition and probably maybe one of the best in the conference. So TCU is fully committed, I think, when it comes to investment in terms of keeping up with the arms race and making their program as attractive as possible.
One of the concerns there is, with conferences is cannibalism. TCU's doing great. Will it get knocked down by one of the teams down the line? We're going to see if it's going to be West Virginia, Texas. A lot of big, road games coming up there that could potentially be a hiccup for the Frogs. That is, of course, assuming they get past K-State, which is a big if. Is that something the Big 12 is going to see a lot? Because it's been some of the most, for better or worse, the most exciting football in FBS this season. Is that something that may claim the Frogs down the line?
Maybe, but the game is the game. When you're in the conference, and I think everybody in the Big 12, including at TCU, you want the conference to be this strong. We hear it all the time about the SEC and the Big 10. How do you got to go through this gauntlet to get to the playoff and things like that? So honestly, maybe if you're TCU, would you like one of these games to be a little bit easier on paper? Sure, but I think overall it helps. It may help your case down the line if you do drop that game. If your league is viewed as having all these quality teams, okay, maybe TCU goes 11-1, but that loss is a quality loss just because the quality of the league. So it could happen. Like I said, TCU, they got to go to Morgantown where they historically have struggled. Texas looks like they're rolling. Iowa State just looks like they're just going to make every game ugly no matter who they play. So you never know what could happen then. But I think overall, TCU understands what's in front of it, and hey, they know every game is going to be a dogfight. So it's going to make things harder, but that's the challenge you want when you're kind of at the top, kind of competing for championships.
Stephen, we all know that hope is a dangerous thing, and it's still relatively early in the season. A lot can happen between now and then. But thinking about this overall Big 12 picture and the reputation it has for teams just, ruining each other, do you think if TCU wins out or maybe drops a game, they make it to the Big 12 championship game, who do you think they're most likely to face? Because obviously we're going to get to see a rematch of another game, and they've had some great ones so far.
If I had to pick, as much as I hate to say it right now, it might be another game with Texas, honestly. Obviously Kansas, Jalen Daniels is hurt. It might be hard for them to keep pace. Oklahoma's already in the big hole. I'm not sure they have enough to kind of climb out of that. Baylor's kind of struggling on offense. Iowa State, no. But so I think right now, if I had to pick, I think Texas will be Oklahoma. Texas should be Oklahoma State this weekend. Let me put it like that. And if they do that, I think they'll be on the collision course where TCU has to play them in Austin, then they meet again at Jerry World.
We want to do just a quick station ID. You're all listening to our CFB Talk 95. We're here with Stephen Johnson, beat reporter for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram on TCU football. Stephen, we want to respect your time. Did you have some extra minutes? We've been going for about 30, but I know we have a couple more questions we'd love to talk to you about.
Oh, go ahead, man. I'm here. I'm just chilling. I'm in Kansas City right now in my hotel room, so I'm not doing nothing.
Awesome. So Sonny Dykes has built up a series of recruiting camps branded as, the DFW Showcase, where he's invited several teams throughout the country to see DFW talent. What kind of recruiting philosophy is played out because of those programs he's running?
I think TCU is showing a bigger emphasis right now on really trying to bring in those kids that might be a little bit closer to the Dallas metro area. Like, obviously, you're not going to be able to put up a fence around DFW. It's like Atlanta and some of these other major metro areas where kids are going to leave regardless. But you have to be in contention and get some of those higher quality kids, those 4 stars, maybe even put yourself in a running for the occasional 5 stars. So right now, I think it's been having a positive impact. I think TCU is making this presence felt a little bit closer out to the Dallas area with some of those programs. Like one of those initial conversations was something like, "Hey, we want to be involved with the Duncanvilles and some of those more of those powerhouse programs because they produce some of the best players in the country." So I think TCU and Sonny Dykes is taking advantage of that, and it's helped them build up recruiting momentum, man. And I think they could be in line for one of their best classes in recent memory. And obviously, what they're doing on the field, it helps as well too.
Absolutely. And I know that one thing that has also been something that TCU has been trying to do, at least in trying to put a fence around DFW, isn't even necessarily about getting recruits and athletes to come to TCU, but also getting buy-in, not just from Fort Worth, but from DFW in general. When he brands his team as, the DFW team, one of the things that I always think of is trying to make sure that they make the same amount of noise as, as a Texas Tech, as a Texas Longhorns, as an Oklahoma Sooners in that region. What has TCU been doing recently to really amp up that fan experience, to get guys to buy in as the casual T-shirt fans and make sure that they convert into season ticket holders and have the experience of knowing that going to Amon G. Carter is a great time?
Well, I think one thing is they really have stepped up their social media game. Just overall, what they're doing. They got the little hip, I don't know, the Psycho Toad thing or whatever they got going with that. That's been real popular on social media. And I think in a way they might be attracting maybe some younger eyeballs to them. Obviously, TCU is going to be at a disadvantage. It has one of the smallest enrollments in the Power Five, so you're not going to have that big, massive alumni base. But what you can do is make the program as attractive as possible to everybody. You know, your casual fans, your diehard football Texas fans, older people, younger people. So I think TCU is kind of showing off that it's I don't want to say cooler because that doesn't sound cool, but it's a cooler program. Obviously, putting those players out first, I think, also helps because in college it's more so about the coaches. Sonny Dice doesn't want to be that. He doesn't want to be the star at TCU. He wants it to be a Matt Duggan, a Quentin Johnston, or a Trey Hodges Thompson. Those guys are the face of the program. That's how it's going to be from the future going on. So I think TCU is just kind of really modernized its approach on social media with how it markets its players, and I think it's paying dividends.
Hey, Alex, we just saw you wanted to ask a question. Feel free to unmute and hop in. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks to you for doing this. Really cool, you. Just a quick question. I'm from the Bay Area. I'm a Cal fan, and so I've been able to sort of track Coach Dykes' career ever since he came here. I've just found it really interesting. He's been able to find a lot of success at a lot of other places, but never really found it at Cal. I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on why that might be? And if this turns into the roast of Cal football, I understand.
Well, the best way I think I can put it, just talking to Sonny, I think, look, man, I think people don't understand when it comes to like making a good quality college program, a lot of it is want to. Like that's from the administration, the coaches, the fan base, the alumni. Like you really want to have to be good at this and you have to be committed to doing that. I don't know if Cal, from a logistics standpoint, was as all in as maybe Sonny wanted or as TCU definitely is. I can definitely tell you that TCU is invested, is committed to being good. So I think that was the biggest reason. Obviously, he had some success early on, but couldn't sustain it. And I think that's it. He said his biggest lesson from California was just at his next place, it needed to be a place. I know everybody talks about alignment, but that stuff matters. Where we're in alignment, with the president, chancellor, the athletic director, and me about what we want this football program to be. And I don't know if California had the same appetite to kind of pursue some of the goals like you're seeing now at TCU.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense for sure.
I can't resist, but one thing we can say this season is, at least from week one, we know TCU can beat Colorado. But
it's been a rough few days.
Oh man, I'm so sorry. Yeah, somebody was inevitably gonna have to lose to Colorado. I did not expect it to be Cal the way the season was going, but
me neither.
Hey JD, I know you had a question.
Yeah, so he brings up the great point of the idea that you have to have everybody wanting the same thing, of facilities with donors, with administration, and I'm really curious to know, because Dick Lowe was such a huge part of making TCU football happen. He was one of the guys who was the big money donors for a very, very long time, and he, since his passing, I'm curious to know, have we seen more old money come into the picture? Has this largely still been like the Justin family is still one of the larger donors, or have we seen kind of a new approach of more people coming to the table in terms of getting the wants of TCU football taken care of, at least financially speaking?
Well, from the events I've been at, and my guy Ian's in here, and he could probably speak to this more than me. I think it seems like TCU is attracting some new eyeballs just from some of the events I've been at, some of the donor events and parties and things like that. I'm not too familiar with the area, so I can't say if it's old money or not, but I can say there's a lot of money around. It seems like every few days, every few weeks, I'm seeing another family commit to an investment or investing in TCU in this athletic program. So I think TCU has been casting a wide net. I know one of the first things I read about Jeremiah down here was just the lengthy list of things he helped fundraise for, and he continues to do so. So I think TCU is still leaning on some of those families they've always have, but they're also trying to expand the net and increase the pot by bringing in some new families as well too, or new donors, I should say. Excuse me.
I'm also curious to know, talking about other people who have been in the program for a very, very long time. Victor Buschini, the chancellor at TCU, has been there pretty much as long as Gary Patterson had been. And I'm also curious to know, with this hire of Sonny Dykes, we've seen a long-term commitment from Vibo when it comes to football at TCU. But what does it look like when, he's had this new guy that he's had to bring on board? Because certainly, Jeremiah Donati is a guy who brought in Sonny Dykes. But Victor Boschini, I can't imagine, wasn't in the room helping make some of those calls as well to make sure that a hire happened.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think right now it remains the same thing. Like TCU understands, like as much as Gary did, to kind of establish the success of the program, there are some natural advantages that come with it. Obviously the academic side, the location, the geography. So you bring in the Sonny Dykes. I think it's easy to kind of maintain that commitment. Like I said earlier, when he already I guess you could say turned around an SNU program that he also kind of commented on. He wasn't sure if they had that same want to and that same buy-in. So I think in terms of commitment, I think everybody was in alignment. Jeremiah, Chancellor, and everybody together and what they wanted TCU to be. Like this hire was crucial. If you're going to be the guy that comes after the GOAT, the Hall of Famer, the best the best that ever was, or one of them, you gotta get it right. You got to get it right because there was always a situation or a scenario where the trajectory of TCU went the opposite way. So I think the fact that they found Sonny and everybody was on that same page in terms of commitment wise is just another one of the many reasons you're seeing TCU get out to this hot start. Excuse me.
I'm curious because Stephen, you just moved into the area to cover the program not all that long ago. What have been some of the surprises for you as a relative outsider, kind of coming to TCU football? I know previously you were covering Memphis, and I know you've probably covered several other teams before that. But what were the impressions for you coming into this, and what your expectations maybe were for the TCU environment versus also what you've seen in practice?
I would say I was never really just sure how passionate the fan base was. I figured they were. Like I said, this has been a successful program. They're in Texas, but I think I've even been surprised by just the overall how much passion there is. It kind of reminds me back home of Memphis. If you know anything about Memphis, it's a basketball city. So the U of M, the basketball team, is kind of the city or kind of the program that kind of gets everybody going. And when I got down here to DFW, it seems like TCU kind of has that same pull in football wise for the city of Fort Worth. So that was impressive. I think, like I said, the overall just the openness of the program now under Sonny. Like I said, I know it's a new era, but just being there, we're watching the first hour of practice. We're talking to all the assistant coaches, all the offensive coordinators. Sometimes you kind of go to the football facility and you feel at home. Like you could just walk around, maybe pop in on somebody's office, just say hello and things like that. So I'm not sure what other program has that type of access. And the facilities here at TCU, even the regular campus facilities, and obviously the athletics as well too. I was just blown away by that. I think it's been a top-notch university. It's been a top-notch experience as well for me.
I can definitely say with the openness of the program now under Sonny Dykes, I think that's been a huge refreshing breath of air for a lot of TCU fans to kind of see how that sausage is proverbially made. And I think one of the things that I've loved is, number one, you have a spring game that's put on a Friday night on an ESPN Plus network, but the availability to actually watch that game. And then you have, this Hard Knocks style show that's also going on through the season. If you had ever pitched that, during the Gary Patterson era, I think you would have just been laughed out of that office. But that openness has just been so refreshing to watch for a TCU program. What's kind of been the benefit for these players to have that kind of openness in this new opportunity?
I think they enjoy it, man. I think they enjoy it. I think they feel like they have a voice now. You know what I mean? They have an opportunity, maybe not for spotlight, but for their stories to be told, man, because they play. I think Sonny understands this better than anybody. The coach pays all the big money, makes all the decisions and things like that. But ultimately, the success comes down to the players. And I think he understands that. So he wants them to have their moment. And I think it's just one of the many reasons, like, they've been able to kind of just embrace what he's been selling from the jump. He said when he first got here, the first thing he did, or one of the first things he did, was just kind of go around to as many players as he could with his wife and just introduce himself, do like mental, kind of just check in on them mentally. And from that moment on, I think he just really, really connected with the roster. And then obviously how he's handled things with the media, letting guys have their moment. I know Max Duggan has been able to kind of be all over the country with people learning his story, learning more about him. And maybe he wouldn't have had those opportunities in the past. So I think it's just one of the other reasons that they've enjoyed this hire and they've enjoyed kind of this new energy around the program.
You mentioned the importance of getting everybody aligned so that everybody's pulling in the same direction towards the same goal. Obviously, we saw Sonny Dykes go from Cal to kind of a little bit of a resurgence at SMU, kind of finding himself again, having a lot of success at that program before coming to TCU. It seems like maybe he's been a little bit more successful faster than
Yeah.
a lot of than quite a few people were expecting. What impact has that had in terms of the TCU administration, do you think? Are they, accelerating some goals, some fundraising approaches that maybe, they were like, this is what we'd like to get done. This is our timeline. And now, they're off to an undefeated start and just pedal to the metal pushing forward, moving those timelines up a little bit, because we all know that nothing drives fundraising like a successful program.
Well, I think there are a few projects that if they can kind of sustain this, and one major project they kind of have that they want to announce in the near future. I could see the timeline on that being pushed up. If you say you won a Big 12 championship, or you make an appearance in your first year, I think that will kind of just continue that momentum they already have established with fundraising and things like that. But I think, to me, man, when I was kind of just researching, and like I said, I was an outsider. I watched TCU a little bit last year. Obviously, wasn't too aware of the story. When you just kind of start digging and kind of just looking into the details, they brought back basically 10 guys on offense. They got a bunch of seniors on their defense, and they landed three pretty good transfers: Johnny Hodges from Navy, Mark Perry from Colorado, Josh Newton from Louisiana Monroe. So I think just looking at it, and I think TCU understood this when they brought Sonny in. They was like, we think we can win now. Forget what everybody else is saying about, you guys might go 6-6 or another 5-7 year. I think the players and the staff and the administration thought, we got talent here. Just maybe if we switch up the energy, the messaging, and obviously the offensive scheme, we think we can compete right now. So I think right now there's a sense of vindication, knowing that their belief in the roster and the program kind of paid off.
Colin, you've been patient. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, guys, for putting this on. It's a great Twitter space, and it's great to see so many Frog faithfuls on here. TCU alum working now out of Vegas for a sports betting integrity monitoring firm called U.S. Integrity. But, Steven, I had two quick questions for you. We've seen Donati with these three kind of cryptic tweets in different locations across the country. Last week in Denver, today in L.A., and we've seen some speculation about the consolidation in the college football space from a conference level. Wanted to see if you could comment on anything there. And then also, kind of as a follow-up, we'd love to hear any updates on the Flying T logo.
Well, I know they're still kind of negotiating that right now. It's homecoming week. They might have something in the works. I'm not sure how far they are in advanced talks on that, but I know there's been some active dialogue when it comes to using the Flying T logo. But as for your first question, I can say the Big 12 is going to continue to be aggressive, man. And when it comes to expansion, the commissioner said it the other day. They want, if it's possible, and if it adds quality to the conference, they want to move into the West Coast, into the Pacific time zone. So, and how do I want to phrase this? They say business is open. They understand right now. I don't know if I want to say the Pac-12 is vulnerable, but they feel like the future of the Big 12 right now is a lot more viable than some of these other conferences outside the Big 2. So I think that was just, if there's anything to take away from it, just know that I think the Big 12 is still working on that. I know some of the talks of realignment have cooled off, but I can just tell you right now the Big 12 is still open for business. They're trying to be aggressive and keep expanding, and they don't want to get left behind by the Big 10 or the SEC.
That's good to hear, and certainly have no doubt on TCU's ability to compete at a national level. This last week, TCU's overtime winner versus Oklahoma State was the fourth highest handle, which is dollar wagered on game across the nation, which is impressive when you look at what games they were competing with in that 2:30 time slot, looking at Alabama and Tennessee. So people love the Frogs, and not just people in Fort Worth.
I know my friends back home love them. I made them a lot of money. I don't bet on the teams I cover, but I'll give some tips to my friends. So I'm sure you had a couple bets from Memphis that were on that handle if you saw.
Colin, more than anything else, I love that you brought up the cryptic tweets, because now I can ask questions about it without baselessly speculating on it. Because one of the things that, again, this is a very stupid sport where we learn things of like, you find out that Jimbo Fisher is taking the Texas A&M job because he threw his Christmas tree on the curb, or Mike Price gets fired from Alabama before he coaches a single game because somebody tells somebody in the back of a taxi who tells somebody else about a strip club allegation, or we find out all these ridiculous things in ridiculous ways. So I'm pretty confident that I am not the only frog who saw when Jeremiah Donati had a tweet of just a pin of him in Chicago, and then UCLA's Martin Jamond replied to that in a since deleted tweet of a Mr. Miyagi nodding. I'm sure I was not the only one who saw that kind of cryptic tweeting. Is there anything that we can at least semi-say on the record? I know you've talked about, the Big 12 is open for business, but is there any kind of active discussion right now for future realignment with TCU right now?
From what I've been told, I haven't heard necessarily anything of that. That doesn't mean those conversations aren't or aren't happening. I think right now TCU still views itself, at least the impression I've gotten of their future, is being in the Big 12 and being one of those, top names, top brands. So you can never rule out anything. And obviously TCU, whether it be for the Big 12 or maybe even another conference down the line, if they want to come calling, they have some really attractive real estate. You're in Dallas. It looks like you might have had the right coach. So, obviously that market is going to be crucial for the Big 12. And obviously I'm sure every conference, well, except maybe the ACC, probably is going to be aggressive. So it wouldn't be surprised me if at least one conference maybe reaches out, seeing what type of potential they could be bringing in DFW's Big 12 team.
Forrest, you've been really patient. Did you want to add something to the conversation?
Thanks for having me jump in, guys. I appreciate it. This is actually a really surprisingly interesting conversation from my perspective as a longtime Southern Miss fan. Now, I mean, for maybe those who don't remember, Southern Miss and TCU played some great games back when Conference USA was good prior to 2004. So, it's been interesting and, sometimes frustrating to, watch the continued success of TCU since they left Conference USA along with several other teams. But I mean, from my perspective, I think the future is bright for TCU. If I had a question, it's that with the continued conversations around realignment and, all the rumors around the Big Ten and SEC possibly forming a new league, where does that leave everybody else, right? Because, I mean, there are nearly over 100 other teams that still want to play football in some capacity, right? What does that look like?
I'm happy to jump in for a second too. I think one of the things as Steven jumps in, I think the expanded playoffs helped a bit there. I think that's taken a little bit of pressure off of it. But Steven, I'll defer to you now.
Yeah, my bad. My mic was still on mute. But I think you brought up a great point. I think just kind of expanding the playoff field, I think it kind of, I don't want to say it makes some of those worries go away for some of those other teams, but I think right now this is the best possible path for everybody, having this expanded field that kind of creates access for everybody from at least maybe one group of 5 teams to obviously you could get multiple teams in from multiple conferences. So if things work out, you would think this could create more parity because now these recruits understand and know that, hey, we don't only have to go to these same 5 or 6 schools to make the playoffs. You could come to a TCU who could win the Big 12 and get into that expanded field, or you could go to say a North Carolina or a Baylor or something like that. So I think for right now, the hope has to be that the expanded playoff is kind of eased any need for, something as drastic as that. And now it just creates this opportunity where everybody won't have a chance, but more teams and more programs can realistically say in the future, if things go right, we can make it to the college football playoff. And hey, football is different from basketball, obviously, but you could be looking at a situation like for some teams where making it to the playoff is the equivalent to what we see from those teams that make it to the NCAA tournament, where that's an achievement in and of itself. And I think that's the best thing for the sport, because right now it feels like if you don't make the playoff, you're kind of, not that your season doesn't matter, but is it really a success like it was in the past? So I think expanding the field is just going to be really great for the sport in general.
Expanding the sport, I'm sure, is also going to really affect that next TV contract, which I know with the Big 12 is currently being renegotiated with, Oklahoma and Texas no longer being in the fold. What kind of opportunity is there for TCU? Because I imagine this new TV contract, the tier 3 rights might not necessarily be the same as they were in this previous contract. They might have, some value because they're in DFW, but since it's not led by cable and cable markets, that's also going to change. But what does it look like for TCU in this next round of TV rights negotiations?
Well, when speaking to the commissioner, he made it seem like obviously money is always going to be important for TCU and all these other programs that are involved. But I think right now the biggest thing for him, he wants to see more commitment in what he said called fringe benefits, and that's in terms of marketing, storytelling, more emphasis on student athletes. Because as a media, obviously, we shape so much of the conversation. And just kind of go back to the playoff for a second. One reason the SEC can always feel confident they can get two teams in. I mean, we spend half the time arguing should they get three teams in. You see people already coming up with those scenarios right now. So I think right now, if you're the Big 12 and by extension TCU, the thing you're looking for right now is more commitment, I think, to spreading that marketing, spreading that attention to all the conferences, not just the Big 10 and the SEC. Obviously, we know how big those brands are in there. But if you want to keep up with those guys, it goes beyond money. You have to kind of change that national perception of your conference, how everybody talks about the SEC and everybody talks about the Big 10. I think the Big 12 and by extension TCU really wants to see that. So I think that's going to be kind of and just talking to the commissioner, it seemed like that would kind of be not necessarily a deal breaker, but it seems like he's more focused on making sure he has commitment from Fox and ESPN to really step their game up in that regard, and not just to be about what it looks like economically for each school.
Steven, I'd love to know your impressions of Brett Yormark, because that's been an interesting fit. I mean, I found his background kind of intriguing, where they got him from the Nets and all that, obviously previously. So how's he been? Because he basically arrived there around the time you've arrived into the market. So how have your impressions been of how that transition's going to under his leadership?
I think he's been doing a good job so far. I didn't get a chance to meet him in person until a couple of days ago here at Big 12 Basketball Media Days. He seems like a smooth cat, man. And I think, at least when I talk to Jeremiah and some of the other people at TCU that have a chance to meet him, I think he's kind of energized the conference as well, too. He does have a unique background. I think he has some fresh ideas just in terms of what he wants to do from a marketing standpoint. That's just kind of really has intrigued, TCU and some of the other programs around the Big 12. So I would say right now, he's made a pretty good impression, and that I think his approach of being aggressive in terms of, whether it's potentially expanding the Big 12 or just making it a more marquee league has been well received by everybody from TCU on down.
Steven, I know that you are still relatively new to the area, but in your experience in getting food in Fort Worth so far, what have been your go-to spots? Because, I mean, I know that, Dutch's, Joe T. Garcia's, Heim Barbecue. There's so many places that are so loved by a lot of TCU fans, but, we can actually get something of an answer as opposed to, a lot of these coaches or ADs who have to, recognize their sponsors or all the folks that they can't, upset or necessarily anything like that. But in your first impressions in Fort Worth food, what has stuck out to you so far?
Look, man, I won't lie to y'all. I haven't spent a lot of time in Fort Worth outside of work when it comes to just getting food and things like that. I have been to Dutch's. I did get a really good burger from there. So they get high marks with me. Honestly, the best place I've eaten at in just the overall area will probably be Ella B's in Arlington. Shout out to y'all. Soul food type of restaurant, kind of close to the Cowboys Stadium. And people they keep badgering me about going to try the barbecue because I'm from Memphis. So everybody's been waiting for months, for my opinion, on who has better barbecue. So I think when I get back, I'll go check out Heim. But, man, I got to do better. I got to do better. I'm sure some people are disappointed in the comments, but just know I'm going to step my game up once things start slowing down after football season. I promise y'all.
Well, Steven, we want to respect your time, so we'll go ahead and start slowly wrapping this up. But before we do, tell our folks out there where they can find you, your work, obviously here on Twitter and wherever else you want to tell them about.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate everybody from hopping on. If most of you guys, if you aren't already following me, all my work, just about every article is going to be on my Twitter page. And that's Steven, the proper spelling, not PH with a V, M Johnson _ on Twitter. I work for the Star Telegram. You can find all of our work, Cowboys, TCU, all that good stuff online as well, too. And I appreciate you guys for bringing me on, man.
We appreciate having you on, man. This has been a really interesting talk for ourselves and for our audience. We know that. And it was great to hear so many people join in, ask questions. Thanks again.
Yes, sir, man. Appreciate you guys bringing me on, man. It's a pleasure.
All right. So just to go ahead and start wrapping this up, this was our CFB Talk 95. We were talking TCU football with Steven Johnson, beat reporter for the Fort Worth Star Telegram. My name is Bob Ekhayeri. I was joined by my co-hosts, JD Moore and Sirius. We always enjoy having these and having you along with us. So thanks for listening. Now, I'm going to hang up and listen.